He didn't look up when she threw it. That was the part nobody in the office could explain. 43 pages of quarterly analysis hit the glass partition and exploded across the floor. 3 weeks of work, scattered like garbage. And Daniel Marsh did not flinch, did not look up, did not stop breathing. He just waited. Leave them on the floor. Victoria Harlow's voice was quiet. That was always the worst sign. That's where they belong. That's where you belong. 42 people stared at their screens. Nobody moved. The rule was unspoken but absolute. If you looked at Daniel, you became part of it somehow. He bent down and collected the pages, slowly, one by one. She had already walked back to her office. He had been at Harlow Capital for 11 years. Everyone knew it would eventually break him. Daniel Marsh, 38 years old, had turned down 3 external offers that people knew about. Senior roles, good money, offices where nobody threw things. He declined all of them without explanation. HR had offered him transfers twice. He'd said no both times. There was a word for people like that. Broken. Trapped. Stupid. But Daniel didn't look broken. That was the thing nobody could explain. He stacked the pages, sat back down, opened the file again. Nobody understood why he hadn't left. Nobody except his mother. And she had been dead for 3 years. Victoria Harlow built Harlow Capital from a $200,000 loan she took against her parents' house at age 26. By 30, she had turned it into a mid-size investment firm. By 38, she was on the cover of Forbes. By 44, she controlled $4.2 billion in assets, had 17 offices across 9 countries, and had been named to the list of most powerful women in business 6 years in a row. She also had a reputation. Not the Forbes kind. The kind that traveled in whispers. The kind that made headhunters preface calls with, "I have to be honest with you about the culture there." The kind that made junior analysts set alarms for 5 a.m. because she expected responses to emails sent at 4:47. And if you didn't respond, she didn't fire you. She just made sure everyone knew you hadn't responded. The kind that had a name for it. The Daniel treatment. That's what they called it in the office kitchen, in low voices with the door closed. When someone made a significant mistake, when someone produced work that fell below her standards, when someone had a bad quarter, they got the Daniel treatment. Public humiliation. Repeated. Escalating. Most people lasted 6 to 8 weeks before they resigned. Daniel had lasted 11 years. Nobody could explain it. The theories ranged from masochism to blackmail to the idea that maybe he simply didn't have anywhere else to go. HR had offered him transfers twice. Both times he had declined. He had also turned down 3 external offers that people knew about. Good offers, senior roles at firms that didn't throw paper at their employees. He stayed. He sat at his desk by the 3rd window on the left. He produced his analysis, he collected whatever she threw at him, and he came back the next morning. "You don't have to be here," his colleague Rachel had said to him once, after a particularly brutal afternoon. She'd said it carefully, the way you say things to someone you're afraid might be in a situation you don't fully understand. Daniel had looked at her and smiled. "I know." "Then why? There's something I need to finish," he said. She had waited for him to explain. He hadn't. The humiliations were not random. That was the part that made them so effective. Victoria had an instinct, almost surgical, for identifying the specific thing a person was most proud of and targeting it precisely. With Rachel, it had been her client presentations. With Marcus Webb from Risk Assessment, It had been his reputation for accuracy. With the summer intern from Harvard, it had been his Harvard degree, which she had referred to as an expensive piece of paper that apparently didn't include a course in basic reading comprehension. With Daniel, it was his work. He was, by every measurable standard, exceptionally good at what he did. His models were precise. His predictions had an accuracy rate that the quants in the risk department had actually studied, trying to reverse engineer his methodology. He had identified the Brenner collapse 8 months before it happened. He had flagged the Voss Meridian exposure that saved them $340 million in a single quarter. Victoria knew this. She had the reports. She had read every one. She threw them on the floor anyway. There was an afternoon in February, 3 years ago. February, the kind of gray, cold afternoon that makes everything feel inevitable. When she had called him into her office and made him stand while she sat. A deliberate thing. She did it with people she wanted to remind of the geometry of the situation. His quarterly model was open on her screen. "Walk me through your methodology," she said. He did. Calmly, clearly, the way he always explained things. Without condescension, without the slight performance of intelligence that some analysts adopted when asked to explain their work. Just direct. Here is the variable. Here is the assumption. Here is why. When he finished, she was quiet. "It's wrong," she said. He waited. "The weighting on the European exposure is wrong." "The weighting accounts for the currency hedge," he said. "If you remove the hedge from the calculation, it produces a different number. But the hedge exists." "I know the hedge exists." "Then the weighting is correct." The room was silent. Victoria looked at him. He looked back at her. The same expression. The patient one. The unreadable one. "Get out," she said. He left. She pulled up the model herself. She spent 40 minutes with it. She found nothing wrong with the weighting. She never told him that. The following Monday, in the weekly team meeting, she referred to his European analysis as the kind of work that makes me wonder what we're actually paying for around here. 11 people in the room. 8 of them had been in the industry long enough to know exactly what the European model contained. None of them said anything. Daniel had sat at the conference table and written something in his notebook. She had wondered, afterward, what he wrote. She had wondered about it more than once, which was itself something she did not examine too closely. "You think this is good work?" she had said to him once, in front of a client, an actual client, sitting across the conference table, pretending to look at his phone. "You think this represents Harlow Capital? This is embarrassing. This is genuinely embarrassing. Do you understand what embarrassing means, Daniel? It means I'm ashamed to put your name on this." The client had left the room to take a call and not come back for 11 minutes. Daniel had sat there. He had not flushed. He had not looked at his hands. He had looked directly at Victoria with an expression that she could never quite read. Not defiance, not defeat. Something else. Something patient. It made her angrier than anything else he could have done. Later, when the client had returned and the meeting had ended and everyone had filtered out, Daniel had remained in the conference room. He was looking at the analysis she had criticized, reading it as if searching for something wrong with it. She'd paused at the doorway. "It's not wrong," she said. She didn't know why she said it. It had come out before she had decided to say it. He looked up. "I know," he said. She had walked away. She had thought about that exchange more than she would ever admit. The specific feeling of those 2 words, the complete absence of triumph in them. "I know." Not accusation, not bitterness, just fact. The patience in that. The cost of it. If you enjoy this story, hit subscribe. This is exactly the kind of story we tell here, and there's more coming. The night the empire fell was a Tuesday. It started with a leak. At 11:43 p.m., a financial journalist named Carla Reeves published a 6,000-word investigation into Harlow Capital's offshore structure, specifically a series of accounts in the Cayman Islands that had been used to obscure losses in the European fund over a period of 3 years. The piece included documents, 11 of them, all internal, all marked confidential. By midnight, the story had 40,000 reads. By 1 a.m., it had 200,000. By 2 a.m., Victoria's phone had 47 missed calls. She was sitting in her home office when Marcus found her. He stood in the doorway in his robe, his hair still flattened from sleep, and looked at her with an expression she had seen before. Not on his face, but on the faces of people who were about to leave a meeting and not come back. "Victoria," he said. "Not now." I said not now, Marcus." She was reading the article for the 4th time, marking passages with a red pen, trying to find the thread. Someone inside had provided those documents. Someone who had access to the offshore structure and who had held on to this information and waited for the right moment, the right journalist, the right configuration of circumstances. "I spoke to Gregory," Marcus said. Gregory was his lawyer, not their lawyer. His. She looked up. He stopped. Started again. "There's someone. There has been someone. For about 8 months. I'm sorry. I'm leaving tonight." He said it like an announcement, like a verdict. Victoria put down the red pen. In the silence of the office, she could hear the hum of her computer, the distant sound of a car on the street below, the particular quality of the air in a room where something has just ended. "The timing," she said, "is extraordinary." "I know." He almost said something else. Then he didn't. He turned and walked back toward the bedroom to pack. She picked up the red pen. The board meeting was called for 9 a.m. By 8:15, 3 of the 7 board members had sent messages saying they were unable to attend in person and would join by phone. By 8:50, 2 of those 3 had sent follow-up messages saying they were unable to attend at all, citing conflicts that had not existed 12 hours earlier. The 2 who did show up, Gerald Farrow and Susan Park, arrived within 3 minutes of each other, sat across the table from Victoria with matching expressions of controlled concern, and spent 40 minutes saying nothing of substance in the most expensive language available. Gerald mentioned fiduciary responsibility 4 times. Susan mentioned stakeholder optics twice. Neither of them looked at Victoria directly when they spoke. When the meeting ended, Gerald stopped at the door. "Victoria," he said. She looked at him. "For what it's worth." He paused. Something crossed his face. Not quite guilt, but adjacent to it. "You built something real here. Whatever happens next." He left before she could respond. She sat alone at the conference table for a moment. The room smelled like coffee and the particular staleness of crisis, the kind of air that accumulates when people have been anxious in a space for hours. She thought about what he'd said. Whatever happens next, as if it were already decided. She stood up and walked out. Elena Voss, her CFO, arrived at the office at 8 a.m., went directly to her office, and left at 8:22 with a rolling suitcase that she had apparently kept packed and ready under her desk. She didn't stop at Victoria's office. She didn't send an email. She just left. By 10 a.m., the floor was half empty. People came in, assessed the situation with the particular animal instinct that humans develop in crisis environments, and began disappearing in ones and twos. Not dramatically. No scenes, no confrontations. They just stopped being there. A jacket left on a chair. A coffee mug still half full. A plant that nobody came back to water. Victoria spent the morning on calls. Lawyers, the 2 board members who had actually shown up, a crisis communications firm that quoted her a retainer that would have shocked her 6 months ago and seemed almost irrelevant now. At noon, she walked out of her office onto the floor. There were 11 people left, out of 42. She stood there. The 11 people who remained looked at her. Some looked at their screens. One, Thomas from compliance, looked directly at her with an expression she could not categorize, something between pity and fear. She walked back to her office. At 3 p.m., she looked out through the glass. 7. At 5 p.m., she looked again. 3. At 6:30, she looked again. The floor was empty. She stood at the glass door and looked at 42 empty chairs, 42 dark screens, 42 desks with the accumulated debris of professional lives that had been here this morning and were gone now. Coffee mugs, family photos, a stress ball shaped like a brain, someone's forgotten umbrella. One desk was not empty. Third window from the left. Daniel Marsh sat at his desk. His screen was on. He was typing. Victoria stared at him for a long time. Then she walked back to her office, sat down, and did not move for 40 minutes. She arrived at 7:15 the next morning. He was already there. Same desk, same screen, same posture. Slightly forward, one hand on the mouse, the other resting at the edge of the keyboard. There was a coffee on his desk. Fresh from the smell of it. He had made it in the kitchen, which meant he had been here long enough to want coffee, which meant he had been here since before 7. Victoria stood in the entrance of the floor and looked at him. The building was silent. The security guard downstairs had looked at her with an expression that told her he'd seen the news. The elevator had felt different, longer somehow, heavier. The floor looked the same as always, except for the absence of everyone who was supposed to be in it. Except for Daniel. She walked across the floor, her heels on the marble, the sound she had always found satisfying, the sound of arriving, of authority, of a room knowing you were in it. She stopped at his desk. He looked up. "You're here," she said. "Yes." She waited for him to say something else. He didn't. "Why?" The word came out differently than she intended. She had meant it to sound demanding. It came out like something else. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He looked at her, the same look she had never been able to read, the patient one, the one that was not defiance and not defeat. "I need you to actually answer that," she said. "I need to understand it." He was quiet for a moment. "My mother worked for a woman like you," he said. 31 years. Same kind of office. Same kind of... He paused, choosing the word carefully. Same kind of environment. Victoria said nothing. She never said anything bad about her. Not once. I used to ask her. I was a teenager. I couldn't understand it. I asked her, "Why do you stay?" She said, "Because someone has to see who she really is. Not the part she shows. The part underneath it. And I'm going to keep showing up until she sees it too." He looked at Victoria steadily. "Her boss never did," he said. "My mother died 3 years ago. She never got to see it." The silence in the room was complete. "I stayed," Daniel said quietly, "because I didn't want to be the person who proved her wrong." Victoria Harlow stood very still. She was not a woman who cried. She had not cried at her father's funeral. She had not cried when she lost her first company at 24. She had not cried when the board had sat across from her this morning with their carefully neutral faces and their lawyer-approved language. But something was happening in her chest. A pressure, a loosening, like a structure that had been load-bearing for a very long time and had suddenly, without warning, been relieved of its weight. Her jaw moved. She pressed her hand to her mouth. She turned toward the window so he wouldn't see. She cried for approximately 4 minutes. She was aware of every second of it, aware of the sound she was making, aware of Daniel sitting 3 feet away, aware of the skyline outside, gray and ordinary and indifferent. She cried with the concentrated efficiency of someone who had stored this up for a very long time and was releasing it now because there was finally no reason not to. When she stopped, she kept her face toward the window for another 30 seconds. Then she turned around. Daniel had not moved. He had not looked away. "I don't know how to do this differently," she said. "I know." He said it without judgment. "That's why I stayed." If this story is hitting you somewhere, subscribe. There are more of them. Every week. They didn't rebuild it quickly. That would have been a different story. The investigation took 4 months. The offshore accounts, she had known about them in the broad strokes and had chosen not to look too closely, which the lawyers explained was not technically a defense. She cooperated fully. It cost her $61 million in fines and settlements and the European Fund, which was wound down and closed. During those 4 months, Victoria learned something she had not known about herself. She was capable of asking for help. Not gracefully, not naturally. The first time she turned to Daniel's desk and said, "I need you to run something for me," without the edge in her voice, without the implication that his previous work had been inadequate. She said it to his back, and it came out slightly strangled, like a word in a language she was still learning. He had turned around. "Okay," he said. Just that. She had expected something, a reaction, some indication that the ground had shifted. He gave her nothing except the same attention he had always given the work itself, complete, quiet, unhurried. She went back to her office and closed the door. It happened again the following week, and the week after. Each time slightly less strangled. Each time he responded the same way, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if they had always worked like this, as if 11 years of a different dynamic had simply not occurred. She didn't know if that was generosity or something else. She suspected it was something else, something more considered than generosity. Daniel stayed through all of it. He came to work at 7, he left at 6. He produced the analysis that the lawyers and the regulators and, eventually, the remaining investors needed to understand the state of the company. Precise, clear, documented in the way that only his work consistently was. 3 board members came back. 4 didn't. She didn't chase the 4. Elena Voss sent an email in month 3 saying she was interested in discussing a return. Victoria's response was 2 sentences. "The role has been filled. Thank you for reaching out." The role had been filled by Thomas from compliance, the one who had looked at her with pity and fear, and had still, somehow, been among the last 11. Thomas turned out to be someone whose instincts Victoria had underestimated in exactly the way she had underestimated Daniel. In the way, she was beginning to understand, she had systematically underestimated anyone who didn't perform their competence loudly enough for her to register it as real. That realization was not comfortable. She had a conversation with her therapist. She had started seeing one, which was something she had previously described as a luxury for people who have time to be fragile, where she spent 50 minutes trying to articulate this specific thing. The possibility that the way she had selected for and rewarded people was a near-perfect system for surrounding herself with people who were good at performing confidence, rather than people who were good at their jobs. "And what does that make the last 11 years?" she asked. Her therapist had looked at her evenly. "An expensive lesson," she said. Victoria had laughed. It had surprised her. The laugh, the fact that it was a real one. "Daniel would say something like that," she said. "I'd like to hear more about Daniel," her therapist said. "You and everyone else," Victoria said. At month 7, the company had stabilized. Not recovered. Stabilized. A different thing. More honest. Victoria held a meeting. In the conference room, with the remaining staff, 23 people, a combination of the few who had stayed and the carefully selected people who had been brought in since. She stood at the front of the room. "Most of you weren't here before," she said. "Some of you were. The ones who were, you saw how I ran this company, how I treated people. Specifically," she paused, "how I treated Daniel Marsh." Everyone in the room went very still. Daniel was sitting at the far end of the table. He was looking at the surface of the table. "I made his work invisible for 11 years, Victoria said. "I took his analysis, used his models, benefited from his accuracy, and responded to it by throwing it on the floor." She said it flat, without embellishment, because embellishment would have been a way of managing the discomfort of saying it. The Brenner call, the Voss Meridian exposure, the Henderson restructuring, those were his. The credit for all of them went to the firm. The credit for the firm went to me. The room was completely silent. This company is still standing because one person didn't leave when everyone else did. And the reason he didn't leave is the best thing anyone has ever said about this place or about me. And he said it in an empty office at 7 a.m. when there was nobody here to hear it. She looked at Daniel. His title, effective today, is Chief Strategy Officer. She let that sit. If you have questions about that decision, I'm happy to discuss them. I don't expect any. Nobody had any. After the meeting, as people were filing out, Rachel, who had been among the 11, who had come back the next morning too, stopped next to Daniel in the hallway. "What did you say to her?" she asked quietly. "That morning, what did you actually say?" Daniel looked at her. He almost said it. Then he shook his head, very slightly. "Ask her." Rachel did, later. In a conversation that Victoria would describe years afterward as the most direct one she'd ever had with an employee, which was saying something given how the previous 11 years had gone. Victoria told her. Rachel listened to the whole thing. Then she was quiet for a moment. "His mother sounds like she was remarkable," she said. "She was," Victoria said. "I never met her, but yes, she was." The plaque went up on the 2nd anniversary. It was Daniel's idea. Or, rather, he was the one who didn't reject it when it was suggested by one of the newer analysts who'd heard some version of the story and thought there should be something permanent. Daniel had brought it to Victoria with an expression that suggested he found the whole thing slightly excessive. She approved it anyway. Small. Brass. By the entrance to the main floor. Grace Marsh. Who believed that showing up was never nothing. Below it, every morning, Daniel walked past on his way to the 3rd desk by the window. He had kept the same desk. Some things you don't change. She screamed at him in front of the whole office. She threw his work on the floor. She called him worthless for 11 years. Everyone saw it. Nobody understood why he stayed. When her $4 billion empire collapsed overnight, the board fled, her husband left, her CFO disappeared with a packed suitcase. She came in the next morning to an empty floor, except for one desk, third window from the left. He was already there. What he said when she asked him why is the most devastating thing in this story. And none of it is what you think.